Chapter 5. It's never too late. What makes Maitri such a different approach is that we are not trying to solve a problem. We are not striving to make pain go away or to become a better person. In fact, we are giving up control altogether and letting concepts and ideals fall apart. I get many letters from the worst person in the world. Sometimes this worst person is getting older and feels he has wasted his life. Sometimes he is a suicidal teenager reaching out for help. The people who give themselves such a hard time come in old age, shape, and color. The thing that have in common is that they have no loving kindness for themselves. Recently, I was talking with a man I have known for a long time. I have always considered him to be a shy, good-hearted person who spent more time than most helping other people. On this day, he was completely despondent and feeling like a hopeless case. Intending to be facetious, I asked him, "Well, don't you think that somewhere on this planet there might be someone worse than you?" He answered with heartbreaking honesty, "No. If you want to know what I really feel, it is that there is no one as bad as me." It made me think of a Gary Larson cartoon I once saw. Two women are standing behind their locked door, looking out for a window at the monster standing on their doorstep. One of the ladies is saying, "Calm down, Edna. Yes, it is a giant, hideous insect, but it might be a giant, hideous insect in need of help." The most difficult times for many of us are the ones we give ourselves. Yet, it's never too late or too early to practice loving kindness. It is as if we had a terminal disease but might live for quite a while, not knowing how much time we have left. We might begin to think it was important to make friends with ourselves and others in the remaining hours, months, or years. It is said that we can't attain enlightenment, let alone feel contentment and joy, without seeing who we are and what we do, without seeing our patterns and our habits. This is called Maitri, developing loving kindness and an unconditional friendship with ourselves. People sometimes confuse this process with self-improvement or building themselves up. We can get so caught up in being good to ourselves that we don't pay any attention at all to the impact that we're having on others. We might earnestly believe that Maitri is a way to find a happiness that lasts, as advertisements so seductively promise. We could feel great for the rest of our life. It is not that we pat ourselves on the back and say, "You are the greatest," or "Don't worry, sweetheart, everything is going to be fine." Rather, it is a process by which self-deception becomes so skillfully and compassionately exposed that there is no mask that can hide us anymore. What makes Maitri such a different approach is that we are not trying to solve a problem. We are not striving to make pain go away or to become a better person. In fact, we are giving up control altogether and letting concepts and ideals fall apart. We start with realizing that whatever occurs is neither the beginning nor the end. It is just the same kind of normal human experience that's been happening to everyday people from the beginning of time. Thoughts, emotions, moods, and memories come and they go, and basic knowledge is always here. It is never too late for any of us to look at our mind. We can always sit down and allow the space for anything to arise. Sometimes we have a shocking experience of ourselves. Sometimes we try to hide. Sometimes we have a surprising experience of ourselves. Often we get carried away without judging, without buying into likes and dislikes. We can always encourage ourselves to just be here again and again and again. The painful thing is that when we buy into disapproval, we are practicing disapproval. When we buy into harshness, we are practicing harshness. The more we do it, the stronger these qualities become. How sad it is that we become so expert at causing harm to ourselves and others. The trick then is to practice gentleness and letting go. We can learn to meet whatever arises with curiosity and not make it such a big deal. Instead of struggling against the force of confusion, we couldn't meet it and relax. When we do that, we gradually discover that clarity is always there. In the middle of the worst scenario of the worst person in the world, in the midst of all the heavy dialogue with ourselves, open space is always there. We carry around an image of ourselves, an image we hold in our mind. One way to describe this is small mind. It can also be described as Sam. In Tibetan, there are several words for mind, but two that are particularly helpful to know are Sam and Rigpa. Sam is what we experience as discursive thoughts, a stream of chatter that always reinforcing an image of ourselves. Rigpa literally means intelligence or brightness. Behind all the planning and worrying, behind all the wishing and wanting, picking and choosing, the unfabricated wisdom mind of Rigpa is always here. Whenever we stop talking to ourselves, Rigpa is continually here. In Nepal, the dogs bark all night long. Every 20 minutes or so, they all stop at once and there is an experience of immense relief and stillness. Then they all start barking again. The small mind of Sam can feel just like that. When we first start meditating, it is as if the dogs never stop barking at all. After a while, there are those gaps. Discursive thoughts are rather like wild dogs that need taming. Rather than beating them or throwing stones, we tame them with compassion. Over and over, we regard them with precision and kindness that allow them to gradually calm down. Sometimes it feels like there is much more space with just a few yips and yaps here and there. Of course, the noise will continue. We aren't trying to get rid of those dogs, but once we have touched in with the spaciousness of Rigpa, it began to permeate everything. Once we have been even had a glimpse of spaciousness, if we practice with Maitri, it will continue to expand. It expands into our resentment, it expands into our fear, it expands into our concept and opinions about things, into who we think we are. We might sometimes even get the feeling that life is like a dream. When I was about 10, my best friend started having nightmares. She would be running through a huge dark building pursued by hideous monsters. She'll get to a door, struggle to open it, and no sooner has she closed it behind her than she will hear it opened by the rapidly approaching monster. Finally, she will wake up screaming and crying for help. One day we were sitting in her kitchen talking about her nightmare. When I asked her what the demons looked like, she said she didn't know because he was always running away. After I asked her that question, she began to wonder about the monster. She wondered if any of them looked like witches and if any of them had knives. So on the next occurrence of the nightmare, just as the demon began to pursue her, she stopped running and turned around. It took tremendous courage, and her heart was pounding, but she put her back up against the wall and looked at them. They all stopped right in front of her and began jumping and down, but none of them came closer. There were 5 in all, each looking something like an animal. One of them was a great bear, but instead of claws, it had long red fingernails. One had 4 eyes, another had a wound on its cheek. Once you look closely, they appear less like monsters and more like the two-dimensional drawing in comic books. Then, slowly they began to fade. After that she woke up, and that was the end of her nightmares. There is a teaching on 3 kinds of awakening. Awakening from the dreams or ordinary sleep, awakening at death from the dream of life, and awakening into full enlightenment from the dream of delusion. This teaching says that when we die, we experience it as waking up from a very long dream. When I heard this teaching, I remembered my friend's nightmares. It struck me right then that if all this is really a dream, I might as well spend it trying to look at what scared me instead of running away. I haven't always found this all that easy to do, but in the process I have learned a lot about my tree. Our personal demons come in many guises. We experience them as shame, as jealousy, as abandonment, as rage. They are anything that make us so uncomfortable that we continually run away. We do the big escape, we act out, say something, slam a door, hit someone, or throw a pot as a way of not facing what's happening in our hearts. Or we shove the feeling under and somehow deaden the pain. We can spend our whole life escaping from the monster of our mind. All over the world, people are so caught in running that they forgot to take advantage of the beauty around them. We become so accustomed to speeding ahead that we rob ourselves of joy. Once I dreamed that I was getting a house ready for Khandro Rinpoche. I was rushing around cleaning and cooking. Suddenly her car drove up, and there she was with her attendant. As I ran up and greeted them, Rinpoche smiled at me and asked, "Did you see the sun come up this morning?" I answered, "No, Rinpoche, I didn't. I was much too busy to see the sun." She laughed and said, "Too busy to live life." Sometimes it seems we have a preference for darkness and speed. We can protest and complain and hold a grudge for 1,000 years, but in the midst of the bitterness and resentment, we have a glimpse of the possibility of Maitri. We hear a child crying or smell that someone is baking bread. We feel the coldness of the air or see the first crocus of spring. Despite ourselves, we are drawn out by the beauty in our own backyard. The way to dissolve our resistance to life is to meet in face to face. When we feel resentment because the room is too hot, we could meet the heat and feel its fierceness and its heaviness. When we feel resentment because the room is too cold, we could meet the cold and feel its itchiness and its bite. When we want to complain about the rain, we could feel its wetness instead. When we worry because the wind is shaking our windows, we could meet the wind and hear its sounds. Cutting our expectation for a cure is a gift we can give ourselves. There is no cure for hot and cold. They will go on forever. After we have died, the ebb and flow will still continue, like the tides of the sea, like day and night. This is the nature of things. Being able to appreciate, being able to look closely, being able to open our minds. This is the core of Maitri. When the river and air are polluted, when families and nations are at war, when homeless wanderers fill the highway, those are traditional signs of a dark age. Another is that people become poisoned by self-doubt and become cowards. Practicing loving kindness toward ourselves seems as good a way as any to start illuminating the darkness of difficult times. Being preoccupied with our self-image is like being deaf and blind. It is like standing in the middle of a vast field of flowers with a black hood over our heads. It is like climbing up on a tree of singing birds while wearing earplugs. There is so much resentment and so much resistance to life. In all nations, it is like a plug that gotten out of control and is poisoning the atmosphere of the world. At this point, it might be wise to wonder about this thing and begin to get the knack of loving kindness.